In this module, you will learn about proper methods for establishing a roadside with seed. Roadsides are a difficult environment for establishing turf grasses, and it is quite common to see a roadside installation failure, as shown in this picture. Let's consider why a successful establishment is important. Most importantly, these projects often require significant amounts of money, most of which comes from taxpayers. First, there is the cost of labor to reseed the turf, then the cost of the seed or sod, and finally the cost associated with maintaining a turf, especially during the time soon after initial seeding. These maintenance costs include mowing, fertilizing, and watering. A successful establishment is also necessary to ensure that a roadside provides its many important functions. A poorly established turf, for instance, will not be able to prevent erosion or serve as a buffer that can capture water runoff or pollutants. Before starting a turfgrass establishment project, it is important to determine the characteristics of your site. What type of soil do you have? A sandy soil will have fewer compaction problems, but will dry out more quickly. A soil with more clay will hold water and nutrients well, but will be prone to compaction. We will cover soils in more depth in a later module. Other questions include, what is the topography? Level or hilly? Is irrigation available to supply moisture during establishment? Will there be water available for periods of drought after the turf is established? How much shade or sun does the area get? These are important questions that will need to be addressed prior to establishment. In an earlier module, we covered species selection. Let's reiterate the importance of using the right mix of grasses when establishing any roadside project. In this image, we can see that the area between the street and the trail consists almost entirely of weeds. This establishment was unsuccessful due to heavy salt loading and the use of a mixture with a high percentage of Kentucky bluegrass. In northern temperate climates, it is important to select grasses that are tolerant of cold temperatures. Each site also has what we might call a microenvironment. For instance, an area that is surrounded by embankments will not dry out as quickly during the summer, leading to higher frequency of turf diseases. Or perhaps the site has a number of trees, and the selection of shade-tolerant turf grasses is critical. Some roadsides have higher expectations for aesthetics. For instance, a strip of roadside turf in front of the Minnesota Governor's Mansion, as seen here, will need to meet higher expectations for aesthetics than a grass area along a street in a heavy industrial area. Maintenance level is also important. Some species, such as the fine fescues, are better suited for low-maintenance situations. Finally, cost is always a consideration. Unfortunately, most of the better turf grasses are going to cost more than the poor-performing types. After you have decided which species to use, the next step is purchasing the seed. Each bag of seed that you purchase will have an official label. Typically, you will not buy just one variety of a turfgrass, but rather a mixture or a blend. A seed mixture is a combination of two or more species. A seed blend is a combination of two or more varieties of the same species. Mixtures are generally recommended for turf areas with differing characteristics. For instance, if part of the lawn is shaded whereas another part is sunny. Roadsides are almost always planted with mixtures of species. The label on the left is a mixture of seed containing strong creeping red fescue, perennial ryegrass, and Kentucky bluegrass. When using blends, which include several varieties of the same species, it is important to select varieties that complement each other. For instance, you might select one variety that has excellent snow mold resistance, another that has excellent drought resistance, and yet another that is very tolerant of wear and traffic. If any of these varieties was planted alone, a lawn would not be successful if any of the mentioned stresses were to occur. When all three are planted together, the lawn will still be able to perform adequately during any of these stresses. The ability to understand a seed label is crucial in the turfgrass selection process. Most information on a seed label is obtained by doing a seed test. The seed company that sells the seed is required to perform these tests. Each state has a seed labeling law, which must fulfill the requirements of the U.S. seed labeling laws. We have provided links with more information about seed labeling laws in the module overview. Purity is the percent by weight of the particular variety or species. Adding up the purity of all species and varieties contained in a mixture will determine the total percentage of grass seed in a bag. In this example, the bag contains 98.4% grass seed. Germination is the percent of pure seed that should germinate. Low germination percentages will require higher seeding rates. Always look for the highest germination rates available. The name of each variety that is in the bag is also listed. It is important to purchase seed that has named varieties. It is important to avoid seed mixtures that say variety not stated or VNS. In this example, the last two grasses listed, sheep fescue and annual ryegrass, are VNS. The seed origin refers to where the seed was produced. In this case, the red fescue was produced in Canada, while all other varieties were produced in Oregon. The majority of turfgrass seed is grown in the Pacific Northwest, and more specifically, Oregon. The amount of weed seed, other crop, inert matter, and noxious weeds are also given. There should also be a sell-by date on the label. You should not purchase seed that is a year or more past its sell-by date or has not been tested for more than 1 year. Old seed will have reduced germination, and endophyte-infected varieties will lose endophyte viability over time. Here are the acceptable levels for each of the parts of a seed label. Please take some time to read through these. As you can see, there are some specific varieties that should be avoided. These include Linn and Nui perennial ryegrass, any variety of annual ryegrass, and anything labeled as common creeper. Linn and Nui are very poor turf quality. Annual ryegrass will rarely survive for more than 1 year, which makes its usefulness as a turf quite low. Common creeper is not a specific variety, and essentially means that the variety is not stated. In northern climates where winter stresses are severe, such as Minnesota and Wisconsin, perennial ryegrass should not be over 25% of any seed mixture due to its poor winter hardiness. Purity and germination are used to calculate how much seed is necessary for an establishment project. More information about how to calculate seed requirement is available in the overview for this module. In the northern United States, there are 2 primary ways that you can establish a roadside turf, either by seeding or sodding. Seeding is less expensive, requires less labor, and gives more options for species and variety selection. Sodding provides an instant lawn that can be planted at any time during the growing season. Sodding would also limit the chances of washouts during heavy rain events. Historically, almost all sod in the northern U.S. has been Kentucky bluegrass. However, there are now some other species available, including fine fescues and tall fescue, and there are also growers selling sod mixtures specifically for use on roadsides, such as the MNST-12 product that was discussed in the species selection module. You will learn about sodding in a future module. When establishing a roadside turf area, it is important to consider how much seed needs to be planted and how long it takes to germinate. This chart gives some guidelines for seeding rates and days to germination. Please take a moment to review this table. Note the big difference in seed size when comparing these grasses, which is further reflected in the seeding rate. We often give seeding rates using the unit of pound per 1,000 square feet. The final column, days to germination, is particularly important for roadsides. If the seed mixture you are using does not have a high percentage of quickly germinating species, you may need to use a germination blanket for erosion control, which can increase the cost of a project. It is important to note here that roadsides are almost always seeded with mixtures containing several turfgrass species. In this case, calculating the appropriate seeding is more challenging. Seed mixtures often come with recommended rates, so those are a good guide to follow. If you want to calculate your own seeding rate for a mixture, you would use the information in this table and then adjust based on the proportion of each species. For example, if you were seeding a 50 mixture by weight of fine fescue and perennial ryegrass, you would first calculate the total number of pounds of each species needed for a half rate. So in this case, your goal would be 4 pounds of perennial ryegrass, assuming a recommended rate of 8 pounds per 1,000 square feet, and 2 pounds of fine fescue using a recommendation of 4 pounds per 1,000 square feet. Therefore, you would aim for a final seeding rate of about 6 pounds per 1,000 square feet. The seeding rate guidelines on the previous slide are important to follow. If seeding rates are too high, the plants will be spindly, produce fewer tillers, and be more prone to disease. If the seeding rate is too low, bare areas will allow for greater weed invasion and the turf will take longer to become established. Ideally, there should be between 1,000 and 2,000 seedlings per square foot. Cool season turf grasses should be seeded in either the spring or fall. The primary problem with a spring seeding is that many important grassy weeds germinate during the spring in Minnesota. If seeding in the spring, the use of an herbicide to control annual grassy weeds, such as crabgrass, may be warranted. A popular herbicide to use in this situation is Siduron, often sold as Tupersan. Weeds are much less of a problem when seeding in the late summer or early fall. Another advantage of a fall seeding is that the young seedlings will not be growing during periods of heat and droughts. For most northern U.S. states, late August and early September are ideal times to seed. Research at the University of Minnesota has shown that seeding roadsides is best accomplished in the fall, while spring is acceptable. Early to mid-summer should be avoided due to the stresses of both high temperature and periodic drought. Weed and disease pressure can also be more of a problem during the middle of summer in an establishing turf stand. Ideal seeding weather is typically later August and early September, but many years, early August would also work well. Another acceptable time frame for seeding is in November when dormant seeding, which we will discuss later in this lecture. Here are some pictures taken in the late fall that show the difference in seeded turf stands based on seeding date. All of these plots were planted in the same calendar year that the picture was taken. Spring planting, as shown in the top photo, can work. However, weed pressure can be a problem. If a midsummer seeding is watered properly and proper attention is given to the area, it can be successful. A late summer seeding, represented by the middle photo, often fills in well and does not need to compete with most of our common weeds as they germinate at other times of the year. The bottom picture shows a weak turf stand going into winter, which could result in greater winter damage and more weed invasion the following summer. This ends part 1 of this presentation. Continue to part 2 to continue watching.